We have with us Demian Bradley. He's the Vice President of Research for the National Taxpayers Union Foundation. Demian, thank you so much for joining us here on the show.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm sorry, the last name is Brady, like the bunch.
Brady.
Get that
Yeah. Sorry if I mispronounced that. But nevertheless, could you tell us about the National Taxpayers Union Foundation?
Yes, sure. NTUF, National Taxpayers Union Foundation, is the research arm for the National Taxpayers Union, which was founded in 1969 as the oldest grassroots lobbying organization to provide a voice for taxpayers here in Washington, D.C. So NTUF, we crunch a lot of numbers, do a lot of research and analysis on budget issues and tax issues, pushing Congress towards tax reform and spending reform.
Well, thank you for that, Brady, and Demian, I should say. And I'm so grateful that you came on the show because we've heard so many different iterations about the tax policy of the Trump administration, everything from no tax on Social Security, no tax on tips, no taxes on incomes below $150,000. And then we've got hanging fire, just the continuation of the tax cuts that were made, I think, in 2017, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe you could bring us up to date and let us know what's going on.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, exactly. Trump's tax cuts were known as the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, were passed in 2017 and provided for tax cuts for businesses, tax cuts for individuals and families. And the latter half is set to expire at the end of this year. So if Congress doesn't act soon, many of those tax cuts that went into place in 2017 are going to expire. That means higher taxes for millions of families and small businesses, as we're still reeling with the lingering effects of inflation. So Congress is busy working on that. They have a budget process so that the House and Senate can start working on tax reform. And President Trump has suggested lots of additional items in addition to extending what was already in there. You're going to have to balance and figure out how much you can squeeze into the tax cut package that eventually gets passed while providing for broad-based tax relief.
So there is a provision in there. It doesn't have to be revenue neutral or something to that effect. Doesn't that create a lot of pressure on the new tax bill?
Yeah. So a lot of people have wanted to raise taxes in order to close the deficit, but we need tax cuts to help people keep more of the money that they earn.
Right.
And the problem in Washington is clearly a spending problem. Because, no matter what sort of tax rates you have, and if you raise your taxes, if Congress raises tax rates, a lot of people respond to that by less investment, keeping more of their money hidden away.
Right.
So if you have lower tax breaks, that allows people to make decisions with their own money rather than sending it to Washington for Washington to figure out how to spend it. And it's better for the economy in the long run. And if we let these tax cuts expire, lots of small businesses and lots of families are going to see a big tax hike.
Right, and I certainly agree with that. I'm appreciative of the tax cuts that we had and want to see them continue. And nevertheless, there's some discussion, for example, even Republicans saying perhaps we should have a higher tax rate for millionaires and so forth. That makes no sense to me at all.
That might run counter to getting the fluid investment throughout the economy that you want to see. The better way, that's a proposal to try to offset some of the revenue loss from tax cuts, revenue loss to the federal government.
Right.
But, the problem is spending. So Congress is going to have to find ways to trim back spending throughout the budget all across the board. So that way the government is smaller and taxpayers in the future will have less of a burden. We can't just keep piling on to the massive debt and deficits that we have currently.
Right. So what role does DOGE play in this entire process of cutting costs? Because it seems to me there's a pretty good effort on the part of the DOGE effort to reduce expenses. Doesn't that play into the formula for reducing costs?
Yeah, they've done a lot of work. One issue, though, is that all of the savings that they've achieved have been through executive action. So, for example, they have shut down think tank here in Washington, D.C., one of the only publicly funded, taxpayer-funded think tanks in town called the Wilson Center. And so DOGE has sort of unilaterally shut that down, cut off part of its funding. But if Congress doesn't act and follow through to pass laws to make sure that those savings are kept in place, a future president could just restore those programs. So Congress has a big role to play in securing a lot of the real-world savings. They've uncovered a lot of fraud and waste, which a lot of it has been known. So they've been kind of publicizing some things that government watchdogs like the Government Accountability Office have spotlighted, but they've done so in a way to make it more understandable to the general public. But we need Congress to follow through, lock in those savings for taxpayers, so that way we can have good tax cuts coming along too.
Oh, thank you, Demian. So right now we're sitting with some sort of an agreement now between the House and the Senate. There's a lot of fanfare about that agreement. Where do we stand with regard to passing legislation that's going to get this done?
Well, it's a lot of work going on behind the scenes as President Trump has offered a couple of additional tax reform proposals, such as those of you've discussed, but they have a fixed set of money that they can use for tax cuts. So if you want to add more, if you want to expand the types of reforms that you're including in there beyond just extending President Trump's 2017 taxes, you're going to have some offsets there. You're going to have some trade-offs. So Congress is going to have to find additional savings somewhere if they want to be able to cram in more spending, more tax reforms.
So can tariffs play a role in reducing these or making up for these expenses?
So this whole bill will eventually have to go through a scoring process. The Congressional Budget Office and the Joint Committee on Taxation will provide estimates for it. So unless tariffs are specifically included in the bill, they won't be part of the official score. So, President Trump has said tariffs are a way that we can raise additional revenues, but they won't be countable for the arcane, confusing sort of budget process that goes on in the House and Senate as they work through legislation. I mean, it could provide real-world offsets, or there could be some damages to the extent that it hurts trade and hurts small businesses getting materials that they need.
This is such a valuable update. Demian Brady, again, Vice President of Research for the National Taxpayers Union Foundation. The website is NTU.org. NTU.org. I hope you'll check it out. And by the way, Brady's column is in there about the Tax Cuts and Job Act. I hope you take a look at it. Demian, I really appreciate your commentary here on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on. I hope you have a great day.
You as well. Thank you so much. Coming up.